Hello and welcome. I'm Matt Saunders, the DeYoung Professor of Art, Film, and Visual Studies at Harvard and the Johnson Kolokundis Family Faculty Director of Arts at Radcliffe. And it is my great pleasure to welcome you to the fourth installment in our summer Virtual Radcliffe Book Talks. Before we start, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge the members of the Radcliffe Institute Leadership Society and our annual donors who may be watching this afternoon. It is your generosity that keeps Radcliffe programming free and open to the public, and we thank you. We also want to gratefully acknowledge the Steiner Dean's Leadership Fund for Academic Ventures, which is supporting this event. Today, we are very lucky to be joined by Martha Ackmann, the author of Ain't Nobody's Fool, The Life and Times of Dolly Parton. Ackmann is the award-winning author of Mercury 13, True Story of 13 Women in the Dream of Spaceflight, Curveball, the remarkable story of Toni Stone, the first woman to play professional baseball in the Negro League, which also appeared in a theatrical adaptation off Broadway in 2019, and These Fevered Days, 10 pivotal moments in the making of Emily Dickinson, as well as essays in The Atlantic, the New York Times, Paris Review, Washington Post. A former faculty member at Mount Holyoke College, a former Radcliffe Fellow, Ackmann has been awarded a Guggenheim Fellowship, the Amelia Earhart Medal for Aviation Research, the Special Media Prize for the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics New England section, and many others. Following the reading, Ackmann will be joined in conversation by Joanna Weiss, the editor of Harvard Magazine. Weiss is a longtime journalist with 16 years at the Boston Globe, who's contributed to Politico, Slate, The Atlantic, The Economist, Boston Magazine, and many others. Her books include Nasty Women and Bad Hombres, Gender and Race in the 2016 Presidential Race, and Taylor Swift, album by album. She also writes and plays for her rock band, the Lazy Susans. Now, I read this book on the 4th of July, which was not by design, but by happy fate. But as soon as I did it, I realized right away that this was truly apt, as there are few public figures more iconically American than Dolly Parton. But like many, I suspect, I was a big fan without quite being a fan. Growing up in the 1980s, it is impossible to say when one first caught the glow of Dolly Parton. She was ubiquitous as a public figure, a crossover star, and sadly also the punchline of bad jokes, both enthralling and confusing to my young mind. I confess, like the sun, I never really looked directly at her, although as time went on, my esteem was fleshed out with admiration for her durability, her philanthropy, her uncompromising brand of feminism. But the person stayed kind of out of focus. So for a novice like me, I have to say that Ackmann's book beautifully does the welcome work of filling in that story. It is deftly written, eminently readable, and much greater than the sum of its already vivid parts. I especially admire how she does the work of thinking through not only how America made Dolly, but how Dolly remade America. She dwells on Dolly's influence, her inspiration to younger people, her astoundingly broad appeal, and her meaning to specific groups. It is a wonderful biography and a thoughtful book, and I really hope you have fun today. Now, we encourage those watching on Zoom to use the Q&A feature at any time during the program to submit your questions. Since we anticipate a lot of questions, we ask that you keep them brief, as this will enable the speakers to address as many as possible in the time we have. And it is now my pleasure to give the virtual floor to Martha Ackmann, who will offer a brief reading before engaging in conversation with Joanna Weiss. Martha, the floor is yours.
Thank you so very much, Matt. It's a pleasure to be here, and I look forward to our conversation with Joanna and your questions as well. I'm going to begin by reading the start of chapter 2 of the book, which gives readers a sense of where Dolly grew up and some of the influences that affected her life. So here we go. Dolly Parton is afraid of the dark, always has been. She sleeps with a nightlight on and hates not being able to see what's in front of her. It started in childhood, she said, when she lived in remote mountain cabins where the glow of coal oil lamps cast eerie shadows on the wall. Country darkness, she said, is the darkest darkness. When it came to needing light, Dolly was like her grandfather. Every time Reverend Jake Owens moved his family into yet another tumble-down cabin, he took an axe and hacked away at walls. "Let there be light," he'd say, as he created a new window. Just like her mother, Dolly feared the sound of howling wild animals at night. She couldn't tell how many beasts were prowling around or how close they were to the front porch. I have to see every sound, she said. I must see. I have to see. Dolly was born in an area that locals called Booger Town. The hollows were steep, the roads were narrow and rutted, mountains rose like sharp teeth, nearly devouring the sun. It was so desolate, some said, the sun managed to struggle through only a few minutes a day. Then there was the name itself, Booger Town. The area earned its nickname from its dark and threatening atmosphere, although origin stories varied. Some said a Civil War soldier came through one night and saw a pair of dark eyes staring from the bushes. The creature turned out to be a cow. Others said a monster haunted the area, killing livestock and leaving dead carcasses in its wake. Still others reported that a gang of men got drunk and swore ghosts or boogers were chasing them. Dolly once said that the only light she remembers as a child was the flicker of fireflies. Each time, the Partons scraped together money and relocated to a slightly larger home, they inched away from the darkest darkness. Locust Ridge was not as dark as Booger Town. Hayton's Chapel was even better. The family would pile their belongings onto a sled, and a mule pulled them away. During one early move, Dolly remembers holding on to an aunt's finger as the family made its way along rutted dirt roads. The journey was practically biblical, a tattered band of exiles moving from darkness into light. Dolly's religion and her growing maturity were on a collision course. The Pentecostal faith preached by Grandpa Jake at his house of prayer dictated that women renounce lacquered nails, dyed hair, and tweezed eyebrows. Dolly's mother, Avie Lee, disapproved of painted-up women waltzing around Sevierville. Nothing but strollops, she would say, conflating strumpets and trollops. Lee Parton did not want his daughter looking brazen or comical with red lips from a medicine bottle, but his approval did not have the weight of religion behind it. Once, when Grandpa Jake told Dolly she looked like Jezebel, she shot back at him, "I don't care." Avie Lee was within earshot and his hitting distance and whacked Dolly on the back of the head. "Don't ever let me hear you say you don't care," she yelled. "I didn't put you here on earth to suck up air and not care." But Dolly refused to change. "I got smacked around for sassing," she said. "Daddy couldn't whip it out of me. Mama couldn't talk it out of me. Grandpa couldn't preach it out of me." And now I'd like to welcome Joanna Weiss to the floor, and we'll begin chatting about Dolly Parton. Joanna.
Thank you so much, Martha. Thanks for that reading too. That was delightful, and leads me to one of the first questions that I wanted to ask you. It was one of the questions that came to me when I first picked up the book. Dolly Parton, as Matt mentioned, is ubiquitous. She's in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. She's in the Grand Ole Opry. She's across the galaxy. What compelled you to write a book about her right now? And what did you want to explore that was different?
Well, my niche as a writer is writing about women who've changed America, and some of those women most readers have not heard of. People like Toni Stone, the first woman to play professional baseball in the Negro Leagues. Others are better known, Emily Dickinson. Well, women who've changed America, I think Dolly Parton certainly fits into that category. But on a personal level, I grew up in St. Louis, and most Saturday nights we were at my grandparents' house and watching television. And it was first, if I'm getting this right, I think at first it was Lawrence Welk, and then it was the Porter Wagoner Show. And I remember as a kid watching this young girl singer, as they were called then, on Porter. That was the biggest country music television show around. And I couldn't express what I found interesting, but I thought that there was more than meets the eye, that she was more than just the big hair and the makeup. So I continued to follow her over the years. I went to concerts. I really like her music, and I just thought that she was a complex individual that did not appear as she seems on the outside. What I wanted to do in the book, and there are many, many books about Dolly Parton, many fan biographies, but I wanted to, I was so glad Matt mentioned this in his opening. I wanted to locate her in her historical and cultural setting. When I was writing, I often would say to myself, would Dolly Parton be Dolly Parton if she had grown up in Wyoming? And I think the question is no. I think that environment that I described in the reading very, very much impacted her. So at the bottom line, I wanted to take her seriously as a performer, certainly as a philanthropist. I'm sure we'll get into that, but also as a songwriter. Dolly just this week won an award for I hope I'm getting this right, but it was the Poet Award for songwriting. And I think that was very, very apt. And I get teased a lot going from writing about Emily Dickinson to writing about Dolly Parton, but I think there's a connection there too.
Absolutely. And the Smoky Mountains, as you mentioned, they're a part of her, certainly her early writing. She keeps returning to it. She then returned to it physically. I mean, there are a lot of celebrities who I think start at a home, and country music certainly has a tradition of being rooted in place. And yet people go off and they move on. And she returned time. She went to her 50th high school reunion, and then the sense of place, the connection to her family, and then the fact that, as you mentioned, she brought Dollywood back to her community as an economic engine.
Right. Dolly had homes all over the world, a place in New York. She had a place in Hawaii, in Los Angeles, but she always stayed in Tennessee and has a place both in Sevierville in East Tennessee, right in the foothills of the Smoky Mountains, where she was raised, as well as Nashville. I think it sustains her, that environment, that perspective. And by perspective, I mean both what she sees in the landscape as well as the point of view. That's her wellspring. She draws from that. It sustains her. When Dolly goes on has time to devote herself to songwriting, she goes back out to Sevierville, to the cabin that they grew up in. And
she writes in that cabin?
She writes in that cabin. And she says, I think it's a little bit more fixed up than it was during Dolly's time. Didn't have electricity, no heat, obviously, no running water. It's a little, has more accommodations today than it does. But she says she fasts for a day and she's by herself. And then on day 2, she begins to write and sometimes stays up all night until she sees the sun rising over the mountains. So it's a place that very, very much informs who she is. Oh, let me change that. Doesn't inform. It is who she is, and she continues to go there as generations of her family have. I think she also feels that generational tug.
Although it's interesting, I mean, she grew up with poverty, abject poverty, as you did mention in the portion that you read. She comes to great wealth and great success, but that's partly because, as you mentioned, she is very business minded. Even at the beginning of her career, one of the anecdotes in the book that fascinated me the most was the moment when Colonel Tom Parker, who was Elvis's manager, came to her. She had just written "I Will Always Love You" when she left the Porter Wagoner show. It recognized immediately as a beautiful love song. Colonel Tom Parker wanted Elvis to record it. I can hear the Elvis recording in my head. You can really imagine it. And she thought, wow, this is going to make my career. She was young and at the start. But then when he came back and said, oh, but you have to give up the rights to your song, she said no. And that's a bold move for someone to make that early in the career. I can't imagine that Taylor Swift, for instance, who has been very, very possessive of the master recordings, didn't take that as inspiration.
Oh, I think you're quite right. And I remember a music historian writing that Dolly saying no to Elvis was the greatest chess move in music history. And you're right, it took an awfully lot. She was leaving the Porter Wagoner show, wasn't making a ton of money, didn't have much money to her name. So the thought, of Elvis recording her song was like something she never dreamed. She told her friends, she told her family. The next day, Colonel Parker calls and says, oh, one little thing here. Elvis always retains the publishing rights. So what also fascinates me about that move is that it happened instantly. She didn't say, well, let me call you back tomorrow and I want to talk to. No, she knew immediately that was her intellectual property. She also
knew
says
her worth.
Yeah, she knew her worth, and she knew she had a right to that, and that she better protect it. And other musicians, when they were young and green and didn't have much money, they would sell off their publishing rights right and left. So you mentioned Taylor Swift taking that as a lesson, and she's not the only one. I think that move and her savvy, smart, decision to recognize her worth is taken by a lot of today's women musicians in particular. One thing as I was writing the book, I was struck by how often Dolly uses the phrase that she's proud of her work. And women still are in a culture where that's a little bit of a iffy thing to say. You don't want to appear boastful. Dolly's not being boastful. She's saying, I created this. It's mine. I think it's important, and I acknowledge that.
And yet over the course of her career, she sometimes struggled to break through and to break out of country music. She went through a lot of permutation. She went through different managers. She had a Hollywood phase. She had some somewhat ill-fated talk shows. What was it that made it hard for her at times to be a crossover figure? We sort of see her at this point now where it seems like she's succeeded, but it wasn't always the case.
Oh, it wasn't always the case at all. When she left Porter, it was very bumpy. She's always had a penchant for hiring family, and she hired a family band that weren't too good. They, against others' recommendations that she not do that. So it was bumpy, and certainly the way she looked, with the high hair and the curvy figure. I remember the small waist. I remember one of her cousins that I interviewed for the book, she jokingly and seriously said, Dolly Parton has that waist because of me. And she told me the story of how when they get ready to go to school that she'd swing by Dolly's house or the other way around, and Dolly would always wear these cinched waists, belts around her waist. And she asked her cousin if she'd put her foot on her rump and pull as tightly as she possibly could to get that hourglass figure. And so, the way she looks, Dolly says that look was her idea of glamour, a country girl's idea of glamour. She grew up, as we talked about, in a cabin where the snow came through and the family insulated the cabin with newspapers. And there were pictures of kind of glamorous women that she looked at, every morning as she got ready. But so she knew that people would often regard her as comical, outside of her little country place. And yet, as the years went on, that initial idea of glamour became her superpower. She said she realized that people would look at her and have one opinion of her and say, oh, come on, this is a joke. Or as she says, a cartoon of a woman. And then she says, I have to win them over. So it gives me something to work against. So I think, back to your question, that the way she looked was an obstacle she had to overcome. And then it became, as I said, a superpower. She's toned it down over the years.
That has kept her ageless as well. I was surprised in a way to see that she's 80 years old. She seems both like she's been around forever and that she would have been a contemporary of Patsy Cline, which seems so classic, and yet she also seems so young, so youthful.
Yeah, 80 years old in January of this past year. And I think another part about the agelessness of Dolly is that she's constantly transforming herself. From country to the crossover that you mentioned, which was bumpy, didn't go well at first until she found the big hit, which she did not write. Here You Come Again was the big crossover song that eventually put her toward the attention of pop audiences. But she's not afraid to change as long as she's true to her inherent values. And sometimes, there have been a lot of misses when you record as many songs as Dolly has. Dolly estimates, she says she can't remember how many she's written. She says she thinks it's around 3,000.
Which is astounding.
I know. Also has a song that she once released upon her death. That's at Dollywood. It's a song that nobody knows what it is. It's under lock and key. You can see where it is in a glass case. But kind of her final statement. But she does keep her eye on what is at her core. And I think albums that were released in the past 10, 15 years or so, the bluegrass albums in particular, and before that, the trio albums with Linda Ronstadt and Emmylou Harris, show how she returns home.
One of the things when you talk about her sort of shape shifting over the years, she was also managing celebrity at a time when celebrity itself was changing. We're right now in this age of oversharing, and we've seen celebrities struggle with the pressure of being in the public eye. Just now, Ariana Grande, today's pop star, announced that she's going to kind of go dark after her current tour. There's just too much spotlight and pressure. Dolly dealt with that long before social media.
Long before. Dolly's mother, when she was just beginning to embrace the celebrity that we know now, told her, always save something for yourself. And that became almost sacrament to Dolly. She's so deft at both being relatable, being personable, funny and down home and all that. That is true. But you realize, after I listened to interviews with her, maybe 50 times, the same interview, that she really hasn't told you all that much. She is just so good at managing to be friendly and relatable, but also about keeping something for herself. And that one of the big things was her marriage. Dolly married Carl Dean when they met her first or second day when she was in Nashville. She took the bus from East Tennessee to Nashville to be a star, met him at what Tennesseans call the wishy-washy, the laundromat. She packed so fast, she packed a lot of dirty clothes, and she went to the laundromat. And they dated for a couple of years, and then got married. And Carl was a Tennessee boy. He liked working on trucks. He liked being outside. He liked going to the hardware store. And when Dolly got one of her first big moments was when she won a BMI award for songwriting. And it was a big affair in Nashville, and fancy food and everything. Carl went with her and proud of her, and hated every single moment of it. he didn't like the glitz and the glamour. And so they were walking out to the car and he was yanking his tie off and said, I love you and I support you, but do not ever take me to another one of those wingdings. And
yet he went around with her, right? He followed her to every stop in the career. He was on the set of 9 to 5. He was, I think you told me a story about him sneaking on stage one day.
say, yeah, yeah, she respected that. And so she did not push him out, didn't go to the award show, none of that. He hated all that stuff. But he was around. He loved Jane Fonda. As you said, he was on the set of 9 to 5. He was there for the filming of Steel Magnolias. And so what we're laughing at is that after I'd written the book, I found out that he was on stage with her one time in Kentucky. She had a concert and she hears something behind her, doesn't sound quite right, the backup group. She turns around, it's Carl. They had a very playful relationship and were always kind of teasing each other. So Carl was on stage singing backup. And, Dolly recognized it as a joke, thought it was funny. Then she got the upper hand and called security and said, arrest that man. He shouldn't be on stage. But they had a marriage of many, many decades, well over 50 years. Carl died a year ago, March. He'd been ill for some time. But I think their relationship of knowing each other was happy when they were doing what they wanted to do. Dolly keeping something for herself very much grounded her.
I mean, it's heartwarming to read about their relationship. On the other hand, again, the pressures of her building her career, she was asked to be flirtatious. It's not just singing duets with other country musicians, but she had a talk show. She was asked to really play up, again, that physical image as a curvaceous, sort of sexualized woman. Yeah. And I always wondered how that affected the marriage at home or how she was able to keep those boundaries. Do you think do you think that she succeeded in keeping those boundaries straight and presenting to the public the person that she truly was?
Yeah, I do. I think that she knows when it's a game, and she is naturally flirtatious. She said Carl could be as well. I don't think to the extent that Dolly, but maybe many of our viewers know the backstory of Jolene, one of Dolly's most famous, that she said was about Carl being a little too flirtatious with the bank teller, and then she added her own Dolly spin on that as well. But I think they knew that when they were together, that relationship sustained them, was great fun. And I think, as long as they knew that each other loved and respected and they would go home to that worked for them.
It's amazing. Can you tell me about some of the other people that you spoke to in the course of researching the book? You I know, wanted to focus on her home on the Smoky Mountains. I gather you did some deep digging into some of the people who really had known her for all of her life.
All of her life, yeah. Well, the book is 10 chapters long, and I devote 3 of them to Dolly's upbringing, to her early years. And because I think it was so important, as I already mentioned, I see that period of her life as the wellspring of who she is. I talked to a lot of people in those early years. I found out that Dolly was not well liked in high school, that she, you think she would be, that she was so vivacious. But a lot of her classmates saw her as cornpone, that the Everly Brothers were coming up, the Beatles, the Beach Boys, Dolly singing on local television and singing these country songs were not what the kids going to high school were into at the time. So I interviewed probably 15 members of her high school. I remember I had her yearbook, not her personal yearbook, but a copy of the yearbook. And I saw that Dolly wasn't named, best musician or most well-liked or anything like that. And it kept being this one woman who got all of the accolades. So I found her and I tracked her down. And she was a city kid. Dolly was a country kid. There's a lot of clash there. And I remember saying, well, tell me about your interactions with Dolly. She said, well, we were in the junior show together. And it had a kind of was a review of American history. And Dolly saying, don't fence me in. And she said there was a time when we were backstage together and they hadn't, small high school, but they hadn't had that much interaction. But what struck her is that Dolly said, I'm headed to Nashville right after high school and I'm going to be a star. And she was so struck by Dolly's confidence, by, the sense that this was what she was going to do. That struck me. That really struck me as saying a lot about how she knew who she was. I interviewed her high school teachers. Dolly talks about high school being miserable for her, and her high school English teacher I tracked down said, it surprised him because she always seemed to be kind of first with her hand up, very, very smart. Everybody talked about that. So I talked to musicians. I talked to some of the studio folks that she worked with. One person that taught me a lot was Steve Buckingham, who was one of her later producers, certainly for he did both of the bluegrass albums. And he talked about Dolly taking one take to do the recording. He said usually you don't even tell a musician that you're recording the first take because it's rough and you got to work on it. But he always did it because Dolly nailed it so frequently. He also taught me, this is a factoid in the book everybody seems to like. He told me about how Dolly relaxed when they were listening to the playback and said that she always liked to eat Haagen-Dazs ice cream, a pint of Haagen-Dazs ice cream. She'd put in the microwave, get it kind of soupy, and then she'd take a potato chip and eat the Haagen-Dazs out of the
That makes her very relatable.
Very relatable. I sure tried to find what kind of Haagen-Dazs it was, but Steve couldn't remember.
That's deep reporting. That's like going the distance. That first take story, though, it I think supports the idea that one of the things that makes Dolly Parton so popular is her authenticity.
Yeah.
And that goes back to this idea. She knew the kind of music she wanted to do at the time, even though eventually she would try to cross over. She knew what she wanted to sing. She knew what she wanted to say. She had stories to tell that were completely true. And then she was also true to the way she wanted to look, even if it didn't always comport with the way her relatives wanted her to be.
Yeah. You asked me, I think your first question was about why writing about Dolly Parton. And I would also say that whether it's Emily Dickinson or baseball players, I like writing about women who know their own minds, who know who they are, and often at a very early age. And Dolly fits that bill too. I think she so clearly saw what she wanted to do, and then also saw that she wanted to stretch herself as far as she could. She didn't, as she always said, I don't want to be just a girl singer, in the background, Porter Wagoner, all of that. So also, coupled with that sense of pride that she has in her work, I would also add ambition. And that is not a bad thing for a woman to have, she's saying. Go as far as you possibly can. See how far you can, and how far you can reach, how many experiences that you can have. I think that's also very much at her core.
Do you think she had moments of doubt? Were there any points in her career where she was at a low, where she thought, I've gone in the wrong direction, or I need to do something different, or I should go back to what I had done before?
Dolly says she has one regret. And that regret is that she didn't have a more sustained songwriting, performing career. She points to Elton John, Paul McCartney, and says, I wish I had, really focused on my music, maybe implying getting involved with movies and television and all of that, had distracted her some. And as a writer, when I'm interviewing people who know Dolly, I always have to ask, what shortcomings do you see? And I was hard pressed to find anybody that had anything negative to say about Dolly. The only thing that that I heard from multiple sources is that she has her hand in too many pies. She wants to do it all, and as a result, she can be distracted and diffused, and that's exactly what she herself says.
Another thing I've found striking about her now, when when you're thinking about the pressures on celebrities, she has managed to stay relatively apolitical. I think she's had to make some changes in Dollywood, right, and in some of her Tennessee ventures to kind of keep up with what's acceptable. But she has managed somehow, and I think probably very deftly and very deliberately, to stay above the fray. Am I right in that impression? Do you think she's done that?
I think she gets flack about it, most pointedly from one of her sisters. Dolly was one
Which
of 12.
Sister? Yeah, which sister gives her?
Dolly's one of 12. There were six boys, 6 girls in the family, and Stella, one of her younger sisters, who's very political, gives her flack every once in a while, saying you ought to be out there. Dolly always says, I'm out there in terms of my music and what it says. And one can only look at Coat of Many Colors, which was one of her first big hits, that now is heralded as a song about bullying in all of its forms, was recognized by the Library of Congress for being a very, very important statement about anti-bullying. And she has supported Black Lives Matter movement. There was an incident in Dollywood with an LGBT guest that she got on. So, in terms of saying this shouldn't happen, we need to do better. And you said she's had some missteps. She has a property near Dollywood that was called Dixie Stampede. And it kind of played off of the North and the South, and it was pretty bad stuff in terms of not taking slavery and racism seriously. And she admitted mistake. They changed it. It's Dolly Parton Stampede now. The word Dixie is out of that. So I would say she's not completely apolitical, in terms of some of those examples that I just gave. But she has such a huge impact on culture. You can see why her sister might jump down her throat at times.
Well, and then she's also been very philanthropic, and I think that's probably been a way that she's remained, in everyone's good graces because of the good work that she's done in her community and during COVID.
Mm-hmm. Yes, a lot of people don't know the full extent of her philanthropy. Some of which because she keeps it pretty quiet. But if you got the Moderna vaccine during COVID. That research was funded by $1 million donation as seed money by Dolly Parton. Her most prominent philanthropy is the Imagination Library, which donates, gives free of charge books to kids from the month they are born until they're 5 years old, and they can get a library card every month in order to promote literacy. Her father was illiterate. He couldn't read or write. Dolly saw that as, her father saw that as something that deeply compromised him and that he was ashamed of. And in response to that, Dolly founded the Imagination Library. I think it's 3 million. I don't know. I didn't check the figures before I came on, but huge number of books to English speaking languages around the world. Dolly said that nothing gave her father greater pride in what she had done than for Dolly to be known as the book lady, and for kids to hang on to those books, and for that to be so central and important in their lives.
That's amazing. Before we get to audience questions, and we have a few great ones, I did want to ask you one last question and put you on the spot and say, what is your favorite Dolly Parton song?
Well, I have many, but I really like a song that not too many people know of called Bargain Store. And it's a song that got her into trouble with radio executives, not to not not surprising. That happened a lot to Dolly. She says, "My life is like unto a bargain store," and it invites someone to come inside, which radio executives saw as sexual, but Dolly said it was like bringing somebody into a broken person. What I like about it, I like the minor key. I like that kind of Elizabethan feel to it. Dolly's genealogy comes from Ireland and Scotland and England, and her mother used to impress upon her, how songs traveled, that they were news that traveled from place to place. And I like that connection to those roots and that minor key. It's wonderful. People should give it a listen.
When did that come out? What era was that?
Oh, that's pretty early. Probably before the 80s, I would think. Bargain Store.
Bargain Store. Okay, everyone go do a listen. Everyone fire up your Spotify. I want to turn to some audience questions. A couple questions about the process of writing the book. One person asked, I'm very curious about what archival holdings you found most helpful as you were researching the book.
Well, that's a question close to my heart. The first place I always go in writing a book is to librarians and archivists, because they will save the world, and they have saved me many, many a time. So I started there in Sevier County with working with librarians in Gatlinburg and Sevierville and around, and then asking them, well, who should I talk to? And one person sets me up to talk to somebody else. So interviews, but into the archives itself, I worked in the Country Music Hall of Fame in Nashville, and their wonderful archives. My favorite find came from, I think it was Sevierville, might have been Gatlinburg, but I found an oral history that Dolly's uncle Orville did. He was the younger brother of Dolly's father, so on the Parton side, and he talked about his World War II experiences, and then he talked about growing up with Dolly's father, not in the foothills of the Smokies, but in the Smokies themselves, inside the Great Smoky Mountains. And this is what hit me. He said that they had free rein to run all over the place as kids, and the creeks and the hollers, and a big family. And his mother, so Dolly's grandmother, said, I want you always to be home by the time, if the pinnacle, the highest peak near their home, once the sun is beginning to leave the pinnacle, it's time to come home. And I love that. And I also thought of that metaphorically, what it says to the generations, that when things begin to get dark, it's time to come home. Not just geographically, but to one's values, to one's truths, to one's family, to what keeps our feet on the ground. And I think that guiding light very much traveled down to Dolly as well.
There's that authenticity again. There's one other question that's sort of specific to the writing of a biography. Someone's curious what inspiration you drew from Alana Nash, who was another prolific biographer of Dolly's earlier work and a longtime friend.
Yeah. Alana, we were in touch, and she actually gave me encouragement to begin this book. I think about 10 years ago, we met in Nashville or we met over the phone after I was in Nashville at the Country Music Hall of Fame. Yeah, she did great work, an early biography called Dolly Parton, The Early Years. It's been reprinted under various names. Terrific. And she was able to catch and interview a lot of people who were gone by the time that I was writing. So Dolly's grandfather, for example, Reverend Jake Parton. So I think it's terrific. I kind of give her a special shout out in my acknowledgments because I think she did such wonderful work at recognizing Dolly Parton was somebody to pay attention to very early on, when she was writing in the late 70s. So hats off to her. Good work.
And one last question about the process of writing a biography from a listener, an audience member, about how you approached researching the turbulent period that Dolly had in the 1980s. She had personal relationship problems, health conditions, concerns, career bumps, even briefly, and you mentioned this in the book, had some suicidal ideation. How did you approach the research process for that tough, dark period?
Well, I think absolutely you have to cover it. And Dolly was pretty forthcoming at the time this was going on. As you mentioned, health challenges, problems with her family who thought that Dolly should be doing more to advance their careers. So she talked a lot about that. It wasn't like something that one had to dig up. It was all pretty much out there. And of course, you have to double check and make sure everything checks out in terms of what a person said. I know I focused a lot. This was kind of new information on a concert that Dolly did in Indianapolis right before all the trouble with it was gynecological problems, and she was bleeding internally, and so I found some people in the Indianapolis area, found some sources that hadn't been tapped before to talk about that period. Doing your digging, double checking, making sure the facts are true, and some facts aren't. There's some, well, they're not facts, but some things aren't true. You have to kind of ferret that out, and just going through the sources.
Here's a question that I think touches on Dolly's self-awareness of her own image, and I think her sense of humor about herself. This is someone who had mentioned they just came across a Sesame Street character named Polly Darton, who sang a song called Waiting at the Bus Stop for You. I'm just curious about how Dolly felt about Polly. And I think I would extend that to say, how did she feel about the way she was this kind of both iconic and in some ways stereotypical cultural figure at that height?
Well, that's a new one on me. I don't know. What was the name again?
The name, Polly Polly Darton, and Polly I just did a quick. There's just a Muppet named Polly Darton, and she looks Dolly Parton-esque in her Muppet way.
Well, I think I can be pretty definitive, even though I don't know about Polly. I'll have to check that. I think I can be pretty definitive and say she loved it, and here's why I think that's the case. One of the people I uncovered was her next door neighbor when she and Carl bought their first home in the Antioch neighborhood of Nashville. This is a little bit South Nashville. And she loved that house. First house, she painted the door red, had red flock wallpaper going up the stairs. And
sounds like her decorating style was sort of like her personal dressing style.
Exactly. Bingo. Carl did the driveway for the neighbors. He was in the paving business. And so they knew each other pretty well. And the neighbor told me that when Dolly was on the Porter Wagoner show, one year trick-or-treating was very popular in that neighborhood around Halloween. And she and another neighborhood woman went as Dolly and Porter. and knocked on knocked on all the doors when they did trick or treating. And I said, "Well, how did Dolly take to all of that?" And she said she was fine with it. I think she's flattered by it. She has a wonderful sense of humor. She's very serious about her work, not serious about herself. I think she would find that fine and dandy.
Here's a question from someone who has been thinking about your Emily Dickinson book and your research and thinking on Emily Dickinson, and asked, I love this question. What Dolly songs would you include in an anthology of U.S. literature?
In an anthology of U.S. literature. Maybe Coat of Many Colors, I think. It is so, there's something deeply American about it, about aspiring to wear this beautiful coat that a mother had made for her. I can flip that and say, what Emily Dickinson poem might Dolly Parton put to music? Dickinson didn't write a lot of narrative poems, but some, and there's one that begins, if you were coming in the fall, I'd brush the summers by with half a spurn and half a smile as housewives do a fly. And then it goes on to, you were coming in the year, I'd wind the months in ball and put them each in separate drawers for fear the numbers feud. Then it goes on, but knowing not when the time will come, I'm blobbing this a little bit. It goads me like the goblin bee that will not state its sting. And that last menacing image of waiting for someone, a goblin bee that will not state its sting. The poem never uses the word buzz, but I can see Dolly Parton going to town on that poem and on that image of menace and threat and minor key.
Can I throw in another suggestion for the U.S. anthology, which I think speaks to another way that she tapped into U.S. culture? Is 9 to 5, which is an amazingly written song.
Yeah.
That first verse is just beautifully written.
Yeah. That beginning, that thump, 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 thump. And then, she's famously said that she got the rhythm by scraping her lacquered fingernails against one another. She wrote that on the set of 9 to 5 and couldn't, of course, bring her guitar on the set. That would be too disruptive. So she had to think of some other little way to create percussion. Absolutely. Bingo.
Tumble out of bed and stumble to the kitchen, pour myself a cup of ambition. I just love that.
What a rhyme.
It's peak to me. Here's a great question. What would you want to say to her or ask her if you had the chance to meet with Dolly Parton?
Dolly's mantra is be more, do more, dream more. If you go to Pigeon Forge and go to Dollywood, Dolly's Dream More Hotel is right there. I think the question I would like to ask her is it ever enough? Why always more? When is it enough?
Is there a point where you think, looking at her career, she could have stopped and said, this is it?
I don't see Dolly Parton ever stopping. No, no, I don't, unless health. And she has some health challenges now. And she's, pulled back on, she was going to do a residency in Las Vegas, pulled back on that, has been doing mainly communicating with the world through videos that she releases. She has a musical coming to Broadway in January of 2026. That's another thing that she keeps private is her health. She's had problems with kidney stones and some other issues, but that has hasn't stopped her, but she is making choices about what she does these days.
And here's a question about you and your ambition. What are you working on next?
Well, I like doing magazine writing because as you know, Joanna, the deadlines are a little bit better when you're a magazine writer. You don't have the pressure We need this book in 18 months on you. So I'm working on a number of projects. One of the projects stems from my first book, The Mercury 13, about women who were secretly tested to be astronauts in the early days of the space program, and they scored too high, and NASA did not go forward on the program. The last woman of the Mercury 13 died a month ago. Her name was Wally Funk. Some of our viewers might know Wally because she became the oldest woman to go up into space 5 years ago when she launched on the Blue Origin, Jeff Bezos. I have a lot to say about Wally, who didn't get in the book. So I'm writing a profile about the woman who waited some 60 years to go up into space.
And to circle back to Dolly before we end, as our time is nearing, I'm curious if Dolly Parton were to start her career today, if she were born, if she were a Gen Z instead of a boomer, what do you think her career trajectory would look like? What would be available for her as the person she is in today's world?
Well, social media, Dolly communicates by fax machine and reel-to-reel tape with people, cassette tape. So she's not the most literate when it comes to the digital world, but that's the world. But that, if she were starting her career now, I think that's something that she would really capture, and in ways that maybe we can't even imagine. But she would see it, she would know it, she would want to be involved.
It invites a different relationship with the fandom. Yes. That's one of the most interesting things to me about celebrity culture today. She was able to keep something for herself when it was mediated. When her relationship with the fandom was mediated in a different way, and there are different expectations on celebrities now, I think.
Yeah, that's very smart. Very, very true. Yeah, just look at all the, as you mentioned earlier, the Ariana Grande thing. I mean, my heart goes out to her so much because she's not able to keep something for herself and is trying to claim that. Yeah, good point.
One last question from our viewers. I think this might be a hard one because everything is interesting and surprising when you're researching a book, but what surprised you the most when you were researching and writing a book?
I guess how driven she is, that it never eased up, it never like took a day off, as it were. I admire that kind of ambition. I think it can take its toll, and she did have some low points, but I think her just overwhelming single-mindedness about what she wanted to do is something that didn't surprise me, but I learned again, and that made an impression on me.
And you think she would look back and say, "I did it right"? A few regrets, but I did it right.
Yeah. With the exception of the song, more time to write songs.
Yeah. And what do you think she would think is her biggest achievement of all of the things we've talked about?
Absolutely, 100% songwriting, without question.
And that's interesting because again, that's her. It's her creative power. But it's also what comes from within.
Yeah. And from her most quiet moment, from her most away from all the other stuff.
Well, thank you so much for sharing all of this. Your insights from writing and reporting the book, your thoughts about Dolly Parton and the way she fits into culture. She is such a fascinating figure, which is proven by how many people have come to tune into this webinar and hopefully learned a lot more from you. This concludes our program today. I want to thank you, Martha, for your reading, for this fascinating conversation. Thank you to the audience for some really terrific questions. Today's program has been recorded. It will be posted on the Radcliffe website in about a week. And for more information about upcoming Radcliffe programs and to see videos of past events, you can visit that website at radcliffe.harvard.edu. Thank you again so much for joining us today. Take care.